Hello, this is Mike Swanson. You're listening to the Wall Street Window podcast. I've got a very special guest lined up in a few moments. I'm going to be speaking with Mark Jeftovic. Mark is the CEO of EasyDNS.com, a company he co-founded in 1998. It deals with web hosting, domain name registration, and helping people get online. He also runs a blog titled Guerrilla-Capitalism. And if you are someone like me who consumes a lot of the financial media, whether that's CNBC or more importantly, stuff on the internet, then you probably know that there's a bit of controversy last month. The website ZeroHedge, which has a gigantic presence in the alternative media, the site gets at least 1 million visits a month. I think it's close to 3 million. Huge presence. But it got banished from Twitter. It made tweets that Twitter decided were unacceptable and then kicked off the platform. And that raises concern for anyone like me who's also a part of the alternative, so to speak, financial media. You know, in 2008, there at that time, as the stock market was in a bear market, before the crash happened, there was a campaign against short selling. There were people that appeared on CNBC and elsewhere that claimed that short sellers were hurting bank stocks and they were behind the drops in the bank stocks. And the SEC announced that they were going to stop short selling in banks. And the banks crashed anyway. Then it came out, well, they were bankrupt. Short sellers had nothing to do with it, but they were demonized during the summer. And I'm somebody who has shorted stocks from time to time, very likely to really start to talk about it a lot before the end of this year with what's going on in the markets, their gyrations up and down. But that'll be a topic for later. But it has to make me wonder, what if short sellers get demonized again? What if I say something Twitter doesn't like, or the Facebook folks don't like, or whoever? Can I get banished from these platforms? How can I prevent it from happening, or how should I prepare myself? Because it's not just happened to ZeroHedge. It's happened to other people too. And that's what Mark's book is about. The title of the book is Unassailable. Subtitle, Protect Yourself from Deplatform Attacks, Cancel Culture, and Other Online Disasters. So, one quick break, and then we'll be talking with Mark Jeftovic.
Humans. Their nature demands competition, the rising tide of aggression shaping the world around us. Natural fear and disgust can overcome the ability to reason. Coping skills are left wanting. Carmine Savastano, Human Time Bomb, The Violence Within Our Nature, poses significant questions and considers the evidence that violence shapes the past and present. Human Time Bomb, The Violence Within Our Nature. Order your digital and print copies now on Amazon.com. For more information, visit tpaak.com. Carmine Savastano, Human Time Bomb.
Well, how you doing today, Mark?
Hey, Mike, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, we've never actually spoken before until a few minutes ago, though I've known of you for quite some time. You have a blog, Guerrilla Capitalism. You have a web hosting company, EasyDNS.com, if people want to check that out. But you just came out with a book recently called Unassailable, Protect Yourself from Platform Attacks, Cancel Culture, and Other Online Disasters. And this is a topic that's kind of in the financial media or financial world that both of us consume and make content for. You also have a podcast because the website ZeroHedge was banned from Twitter just a few weeks ago because of posts that they were making about the coronavirus, and it makes me have to wonder, am I going to get banned too? What is acceptable, what isn't, or how can this change week by week? So it's interesting times we live in, to say the least.
Yeah, it really is. And part of the problem is that the reasons why, or the reasons that are given by these tech platforms for why one account gets suspended and another account doesn't, they just seem to be kind of mercurial. Like what works for one person is off limits for another person. I mean, ZeroHedge, I've been reading ZeroHedge for years. They're an easy DNS client, and I deal with them on a regular basis. I think some of my guerrilla capitalism stuff ends up on ZeroHedge. And so when they got suspended from Twitter, the first thing I did was, I looked at the article and was like, well, why is this? Why are they getting suspended for this? And then the crazy thing about, there's a number of crazy things about it. Like, one is apparently it was done in response to a BuzzFeed article. So some other article that happened someplace else entirely wrote like a hit piece against ZeroHedge that, when you look at it, was, factually incorrect. And then Twitter looks at that external article and uses it as a basis without even contacting ZeroHedge to take away their Twitter account. It just seems kind of, capricious and arbitrary, really. I've been running a abuse desk for 22 years, and you get a complaint about a customer, the very least you're going to do before you suspend their account or take their website down or take their domain down is you're going to go look at the customer or talk to them and say, okay, well, what exactly is going on here? And does it violate our terms of service? And one of the things that bugs me about these tech platforms, and I mentioned this in the book, tech platforms are trying to regulate what happens off their platforms. Twitter has rules for what you do off Twitter. Facebook has rules for what you do off Facebook. Patreon has rules for what you do off Patreon. And it's ridiculous, because what they're essentially doing is setting themselves up as courts. They're like adjudicating international law and making these decisions of like, well, you did this over here, so on that basis, we're going to penalize you over here. And it really makes absolutely no sense, and it's hard to even make a rational case for it. I think what these platforms ought to be doing is Twitter should just look at the tweets, what's happening right here in the Twitter stream on our platform. Does it break the rules? Doesn't it break the rules? Yes or no?
Well, Facebook is one too that I find really annoying, because they have changed their rules over the years too. At first, they basically, as someone creating content, they were basically saying, come to Facebook and we'll help you get views and hits and whatever. And then you do it, they tell you, build up your fan page and want you to spend money to do it. And then they basically devalued everyone's Facebook pages except for probably, I would say, the corporate media. And some people, I'm trying to think of there was a website, I know the guy's based in California, some antimedia.com or org, that's it. And this guy was getting tens of thousands at least hits from Facebook every month, and just by putting their posts on there. And the guy had hired writers and creating content, and then just suddenly Facebook accused them of trying to game them by posting their articles on more than one page, is essentially what they're claiming, and then just deplatformed them, kicked them, banished them instantly overnight. So these kind of things can happen for strange reasons, and they never give any warning. But that's where I think it gets even more creepy, though, is where it seems to be political in a lot of cases. So you mentioned the ZeroHedge article. I didn't know that you work with them directly, or they work with you, but a day before they were banned, maybe that morning, I read an article in either the New York Times or the Washington Post, which said something to the effect that this coronavirus is an issue that Facebook and Google and these tech companies are going to closely monitor to stop the spread of fake information. And then the next thing I saw was ZeroHedge was banished from Twitter. So I think there's some real something was going on that for some reason these tech companies really zeroed in at that moment on this issue of the coronavirus, and then ZeroHedge got sucked up into it. But that was a funny case where I actually read about, oh, they're going to really crack down on people, is what the article was saying, and then boom, they did it. So that was kind of strange. I don't know if the ZeroHedge people even noticed that article or knew it about it later.
They probably did. I mean, so the interesting thing about the ZeroHedge case is that a lot of what they were speculating on early on in the coronavirus outbreak, you know, they were sort of deplatformed, I suppose, on the pretense of, you know, spreading fake news, and then the exact same talking points or narratives that ZeroHedge was asking about very early in the game were suddenly coming out in the mainstream press, and or even lawmakers. You had that, you might know the name better than I, but you had that Republican lawmaker sort of asking, in polite company, is the coronavirus possibly a bioweapon? I can't remember who
Yeah, I don't
guy
remember.
was. But, you know, it suddenly, and that kind of dovetails in with something that is going on up here in Canada that we were talking about before we started rolling, is that there's a concerted effort, I think, amongst mainstream media and, you know, government agencies, that sort of thing, to start tightening up control around the narratives. So in Canada, the federal government here started a telecom review, like a review of the telecom legislation, and the panel just released its findings like really early in January. And they were saying their recommendations included all content creators would have to get a license. Like, I mean, including people like you, people like me. If you were in Canada, it's like you would have to get a license from the CRTC to put out your blog. They were talking about forcing the tech platforms like Facebook and Twitter to make trusted news sources more discoverable than everything else, and just that sort of approach. And then, lo and behold, about a month later, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is, you know, state-funded media network, they roped together a bunch of Canadian media companies, and they put out an open letter saying that the government should introduce regulation to regulate trusted sources of news. So suddenly, you know, there is this chorus of people or entities calling for rules around trusted sources of news, and it's the alternative news and it's the indie news who are putting out either the highest quality content. I mean, around coronavirus, you have Chris Martenson and his Peak Prosperity. He's putting out excellent work following this, or at the very least, being there earlier than anybody else, like ZeroHedge, you know, asking the same questions that the mainstream media finally gets around to asking, but 6 weeks earlier or 4 weeks earlier. But, you know, it is kind of scary, and the tech companies, the platforms, do seem to move in concert sometimes. Like one of the guys in the book, Police the Police and the Free Thought Project, I talked to him, Jason Bassler, and we think they may have been the very first coordinated deplatforming between the social media things. They were taken down off of Facebook and Twitter, multiple pages, multiple accounts on the same day. I don't have the date handy in front of me, and I've often wondered, was that kind of like a prototype or let's map out the blueprint for how we do this, and then we've seen that sort of thing happen down the road.
Well, I'll just bring up one last example, and then ask more about your book. But you mentioned Charles Hugh Smith, and he's someone who puts out. He's a great writer. He puts out something every single day, and I think he's got a pretty big following because his stuff's distributed on ZeroHedge and a lot of other websites, and he's written some great books too. And after the Trump election, the issue of Russia and the election and fake news, that all blew up in the mainstream media. And the Washington Post put out an article saying that this organization had studied the internet and found 100 or so websites that they said were basically under some sort of Russian control. And the list of the websites were basically dominated by people. I mean, it listed Russia RT, the RT.com, which, yeah, it is dominated by Russia. It's owned by the Russian government. So there's one. And it listed like maybe 5 that are truly Russian. But then the whole rest of the list was either left-wing Democrats, that Bernie types or something, was maybe 10%. But then the bulk of the list were alternative financial media websites. ZeroHedge was on the list, but so is Charles Hugh Smith's website. And some websites like Consortium News, I think antiwar.com was on the list. So these are all people that have consumed their media, these different sources, for 10 years. And none of these people are Russian agents or have any connection to them. And the source of the Washington Post article was some organization that put up a website making these claims. The website was called Prop or Not, and then they were hiding their identity. It's really fuzzy who they even were. So the whole thing was very bizarre, but it appeared at the time to be, some sort of attempt to foment more hysteria, and it's all kind of, that hysteria's kind of passed, I think, since then. Maybe this was the peak of it, but maybe it was an attempt to try to, if we can get people scared enough, we can really regulate more or whatever. But it was just very bizarre. So I kind of feel like these things may come in waves, and that was one wave a few years ago, and then these issues in Canada, that's sort of a wave of this. So these things seem to come and go, and maybe the coronavirus is an issue that was a wave used to attack the ZeroHedge website. So who knows what the next kind of fear thing will be, next year or whatever. That's kind of how I feel this is going.
Yeah, I mean, specifically the Prop or Not episode, I still get angry when I think about that because, and we were talking before we rolled again, I had just finished producing my first audiobook, because I've got, I do audiobooks on the side, and it was Charles Hugh Smith's audiobook, A Radically Beneficial World. And all of a sudden, all over the mainstream press, it's saying that, my first artist on this label, so to speak, is a Russian propaganda. Like, it was just idiotic. Like, that's the best word for it. And then the fact that a claim like this could be made anonymously and completely without any substantiation whatsoever, and suddenly it gets run in the Washington Post and it gets picked up by the New York Times, and in the same breath they're talking about fake news. Like, how on earth is this? How is this not fake news? This Prop or Not nonsense? And then it's such a bizarro world phenomena. And so I just completely lost my train of thought, Mike. Sorry.
No,
about that.
I think you're absolutely right. It is. I mean, it's bizarre, but I guess, yeah, the big question really is, this is a problem. Anyone can say something controversial or be labeled as controversial, and then these platforms can take you off their platforms, kick you off, and they're all private businesses. There's no way to stop them from doing that, and it really is up to them. So, what what your book is about, though, is what can we do about it? How do we protect ourselves from this issue?
Right. I just to pick up my train of thought, the word I was trying to think of internally was McCarthyist. It was very McCarthyist what happened to Charles Hugh Smith. And to answer your question, I mean, Charles also wrote the foreword to my book, and in that foreword, he says, the number one source of data that I cite in my writing is the Fred website. Right, the Fed Reserve website. Mm-hmm. He's like, so I'm being called fake news, and the number one source of data in all my writing is Federal Reserve official data. So, but to what do you do about it? The thing is, what we see too many people doing, and fortunately, like ZeroHedge in particular, they do it the right way, is you have to recognize the role that these social media platforms play in your content business or your online activities. And too many people, they lean too far over their center of gravity onto those platforms, so that they might build up a YouTube following. Like, they've got a YouTube channel and they got a million followers, and they're making all of their money or checks from Google for their things. But then at the press of a button, YouTube demonetizes you and it's all over. Or Facebook, you've got like tons of likes, and like that, those guys you were talking about who were getting all of their traffic were coming in from Facebook referrals. Same people who might be doing something on Twitter. All of that's in somebody else's control. So what we say, or what I say, is you want it all under your own control. So number one, you do everything on your own website. You have a domain that you own, you run your website on it, and then everything else out there on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube and all of these things, you're not on those platforms to build up users there. You don't even consider those your users, don't even consider them your audience. Those are leads. Those are prospects. You just worry about how many Facebook likes does it take to get somebody to opt into your email list on your website. How many YouTube followers does it take? How many Twitter followers does it take? All you really care about, or what you ultimately care about, is how many of those people you can pull from those outside social media platforms back to your website, where you can get them opting into your mailing list or getting into your database. I mean, the point we hammer all the way through the book is the customer or the user or the lead or whatever you want to call them, they belong to whoever's database they're in. So if they're in Twitter's database, that's not your user. It's Twitter's user, and they're allowing you to access that user as long as you play by their rules.
Well, that's a huge point to make. And as someone that has a website and is putting out content on all these social media platforms, I gotta say, it's easy to get distracted, and you got to figure out what is the important metric to be watching. Is it and figure out what those are. For me, it should be the number of people that opt into my email list, and then the number of people opening the emails. And all the other metrics aren't that important in comparison. But what happens is you're on the internet, and then you discover Facebook or one of these new platforms when it is new to you, and then you get on there and you're like, oh, I'm getting likes, and then you start thinking the likes are useful and interesting, or people are doing this on Instagram or whatever, And that's how most people interact with the internet. They think, I got all these Facebook followers, just anybody, kids on Instagram or whatever, and they're like, I'm getting this attention. But in the end, it's sort of an illusionary, because what's that attention really worth? And it can be taken away, as you've been talking about, and at any moment when they decide we don't want you on there. So the email list is, to me, the most important thing, and then you got to have a website or some sort of platform. But is there anything, even when you have those, that you have to worry about, you think?
Well, and then beyond that, I suppose, is what is it that what are you selling? What's your revenue model? And then, so of course, the number one thing is your customers, right? And having a relationship with your customers. And that sort of exposes another weakness that people fall into is, let's say they have a really high traffic website, they're putting out content, they're getting, millions of people a day or whatever, and they decide, well, we're going to monetize it through, again, you go back to an external platform, you put AdSense in there, or you do something like that. Then you're subjecting yourself to the same weakness, because then people can come along and they can say, hey, they can complain, they can pressure advertisers to pull their ads from your site, they can pressure Google to cancel your AdSense account. We see that happening all the time. And so again, your lifeblood gets pulled out from underneath you. Patreon, like a lot of people are using Patreon these days, and that's like a huge weak spot, because again, Patreon can pull the plug on you. They think they're completely subjective about it, but it's impossible to be subjective about it. Or they think they're completely objective about it, and they think they've devised a process to remove subjectivity from the demonetization process. I mentioned that in the book, but it's impossible to remove subjectivity from a judgment call. It's by definition, you can't do it. So what you have to do, and we mentioned it in the book, there's good revenue models and there's bad revenue models. The bad revenue models are the ones where somebody else gets to make the decision to turn off the money spigot. The good revenue models put you in direct contact with the people who are actually paying you. So you could have a newsletter, a paid newsletter. You've had one for a long time. I've been subscribers for I don't know, over a decade, I think. And you can get direct sponsorships to your website. You can do product placements. You can do affiliate marketing deals with companies directly, and that sort of thing. They may be harder to set up, and they may take longer to build up your customer base, but once you have that established and you have that organic groundwork and growth happening, you're a lot harder to demonetize as well.
Have you ever spent much time? I haven't done it in a while, but there was a time I was really consuming a lot of material about internet marketing. Did you ever look into that niche and the stuff that they put out?
Well, it's funny. I'm looking at it more now because my wife just wrote, like, she released her debut novel a year ago, and so she's been like, and so she's self-published, and so she's been going, all in, just not all in, but I mean, she's been spending a lot of time learning all that stuff. And the funny thing is that Easy DNS was kind of fortunate that we grew by word of mouth for almost our entire history. So, but then, after about 15, 16 years, we noticed it getting a bit more competitive out there. So we started putting a toe into internet marketing. And so over the last, I'd say, year to 18 months, just, exploring it with my wife, saying, how does all this work now? Because I hadn't really taken a really close look at it. And we're starting to now. And I'll be honest, I mean, I'll try some guy's course on how to use Facebook to build your mailing list, and it nothing's really worked as well as, on Easy DNS, just leveraging off our existing customer base, putting out Access of Easy every week, good content, not trying to sell anybody anything. People spread it around. It kind of grows organically. And on the guerrilla capitalism side, I just put out content sporadically. I don't do it regularly enough. And then, a subscriber magnet on my website that just offers a free book for opting in, and that's been working pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's the reason I say this, or I was asking, is that you're basically doing the what works, the fundamentals, right, or of internet marketing. But if you get into that niche of people selling courses and so forth, almost all of it is all about get on this platform to make money. It's
Yes.
like the opposite of what you should be doing, because it's not I'm not necessarily blaming it on the people creating the products, because what's going on, I'm certain what's going on is that this is what the people buying these courses want. Basically, that's the one problem I have found over the years on the internet, is so much of it is what becomes popular or whatever is sort of determined by these algorithms on Facebook and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily what's best for the people. It's so in the internet marketing niche, it's all like, well, there's lots of courses that were about, get rich by selling stuff on Amazon, and they would tell you how to get your stuff from China somehow and resell it.
Yeah, like
these kind of
this
things.
Guaranteed
Yeah.
system to build a fulfilled by Amazon business that's like, turnkey, it'll work, and that becomes hot for like 6 or 7 months, and then something else comes along.
Yeah.
And so my big complaint about that for years, which was one of the reasons why, EasyDNS did very little marketing for the longest time, and still doesn't by this kind of measure, is that a lot of these marketing systems, I think the euphemism I used to use, these are marketing systems designed to teach wannabe marketers how to sell marketing systems to other marketers, right? Mm-hmm. It's just all kind of circular, and nobody's building actual products or actual services to plug into these wonderful marketing funnels. Or if they do, you hear a lot more of like these fulfilled by Amazon things, these Amazon FBA businesses are big now. Let's say you actually get that working for a while. It's not a sustainable business, right? And I know from reading your stuff over the years, you're an investor, you think like a businessman, you look at owning pieces of companies, you look at having ownership of revenue producing assets, and that's always how I've looked at everything I do. I don't want to put all this time and effort into building some sort of funnel-driven site using external platforms that can take me offline at any second, that has like little resale value when it's all over. You can't, you can maybe get, a really low multiple if you can sell the business at all. And I just find it has this sort of, transient quality to it. And so, you probably know Warren Buffett's phase, like the wide moat, right? I want,
oh sure,
if I'm going to put my effort into a business, I want a wide moat. And I wrote an article on a really old blog I had a long time ago called The Web Value Investor, and I said, the internet equivalent of having a wide moat is not needing Google, right? And I wrote that before Facebook or Twitter were that huge. And the reason I wrote it was because at the time, we did something weird at EasyDNS once, so we got delisted from Google for purely technical reasons. And it took us 5 weeks to notice because nothing happened. Like our traffic didn't really go down and sales didn't really go down. And just one day someone said, I'm trying to do this thing and I'm noticing this thing under the hood is spitting out a 500 server error. And that was like confusing the Google spider. So Google basically delisted us. And it was like, okay, well, let's fix that. We got fixed and we kind of got back into Google and stuff like that. But it wasn't the end of our business. And to me, that's the idea of a wide moat, right? When the number one search term that gets people to my business is my business's name, that's okay. That I can work with. But if it's some other phrase that I've been like gaming the algos to get to number one in Google, I mean that's transient. That's not going to last. And it's the same for Facebook, and it's the same for Twitter and all of those external platforms.
Well, I a year ago about I decided I've got all these books all over in my house, and I decided I want to get rid of some of them because they're just old used books. So I thought, well, I'll just try to sell them on Amazon. Just instead of throw them in the trash or just give them away or something, I'll just see what that's like. So I've sold about 100 books on there, and you don't make any money. So doing that, and then after a while, after like 6 months of this, I'm like, well, all I'm doing is working for them and making like 10 cents every time I sell a book. But so it's kind of silly. And then the other month, I had 30 or 50 copies of the Stan Weinstein book that I put up for sale.
I love that book because of you.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm staring. Anyway, I'm looking at a copy now. But I bought like 50 copies like 10, 15 years ago. The idea I was going to give them away. And then they're just sitting there. So I'm like, well, I'll just sell them. And one guy bought the book. And then I had sold 100 books by now. And this guy buys one. And then he filed a complaint. And it's the first time anyone had complained about anything on there that I was doing. And the complaint goes to you, and then you have to deal with it. So his complaint was, I don't want the book. Give me a refund. And no one had asked for a refund before. So I couldn't find what their policy was. I just wasn't taking the time, I guess, the hours it would take to do it. I tried for like 15 minutes. And then I just replied back. I said, well, just send the book back and then as a return, and I'll refund it. And then he said, if you don't send me the money, I'm going to file a complaint.
Yeah.
So I was like, I mean, this is really weird. I mean, I've been, like you said, I've had this newsletter for almost 20 years now. No, I don't, very rarely do people do things like that. And I don't know if anyone's ever done that before that I've encountered. So anyway, he did. He filed a complaint with them and gave me a 0 stars or something, and they won't take it down. Even though they got the text of everything he was writing and all this stuff. And so my point, I'm just re-emphasizing what you're saying, is that here's an example. If you build a business, if you think you're not building a business, if you're selling stuff on Amazon or eBay, or, if you're just trying to make money off these platforms, you're working for them, and it's just crazy. Something will eventually happen, and you'll be like, I'm gonna, what's that book, Frank Kafka or whatever? Yeah. This is just great.
Trial.
The trial is like it's something. So, but I guess the thing about is, we were this issue about being deplatforming. You think of the political issues, or or something. Someone saying something really crazy or whatever, and they kick you off. But it can, I think it can also be where there's just a crazy person, that could do something to harass you or whatever and give you enough trouble. So all this stuff, I think, defends against that too, that you talk about in your book.
Yeah, for sure. And the problem, I mean, what you're talking about is then that complaint hits your algo. Right, so to people searching on the people searching on the book that you and some other books reseller have, they're going to put their listing up before yours if they're higher ranked, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so if you're dealing with your customers directly, at least the guy would come to you. I want my money back. Why? Because I don't like the book. Well, that's not really a covered reason or whatever, but at least the the disagreement is between the two of you, and it's not gonna. But yeah, it's what you said it, well, when you said you're working for them. Like, you're not building a business. The phrase that entered my mind when you said, you're not building a business, is you're actually, what you think is your business is actually, you're just participating in the gig economy for them.
Which, that's a phrase I never heard. I don't remember. Didn't enter my consciousness till a few years ago. Even though I guess someone may think I was a part of it, but it's taking over. That's more and more, I guess, what people are thinking about. But being an Uber driver, you don't own Uber. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So
in fact, it's even worse the way you're describing it for Amazon, because it's like getting you to pull a book that you already bought and warehoused for them off the shelf, package it, ship it, send it for 10 cents. And like, you completely took all the work off of their backs.
Well, with the book selling is you can have them store items in their warehouse.
Right.
So you could send the books to them, and then they would do it all for you. And these courses where they tell you to make money off Amazon, that's what they basically tell you to do. But the problem with a book is most books just don't sell that much.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can have a book stored in their warehouse for a year before it sells. It's only the best sellers that are just going to fly off the shelves, so to speak. So you're not. That's why I was doing it out of my house, because if I send 100 books to Amazon, I'm going to lose money, paying them to store them. It's just it's just like a crazy business. But the idea that I was seeing people teach people was, you got to buy these things in China, and you need to look for items that are just selling really big and this and that.
And how do you think those businesses are going to do now? Like, source your stuff in China and sell it on an FBA business like that. All of that just went out the window.
Oh, it's over now. I don't know what they're doing. And then the people now, if some guy orders something and it comes from China, they may get scared, file a complaint on that. You're trying to get me the virus or something.
You never know these days.
But, well, anyway, I don't want to keep you too much longer. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me and share your thoughts with everyone on my email list and elsewhere. And recommend they get your book, unassailable.com, and actually
it's actually unassailable book.
Oh, unassailable. I mean, and if they want help, website hosting and so forth, what can you do for them?
Yeah, well, we're our main business is a domain registrar and DNS provider, and we do the web hosting as well, and we got a managed WordPress platform called EasyPress, and just head on over to easydns.com, and we've got the weekly Access of Easy newsletter, and anyone who wants to talk to me, I'm pretty easy to find online, but it's just markjr at easydns.com, Mark with a K, and you can always just send me an email and ask me a question.
Great. Well, thanks for talking to me. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.